In our previous example, we had seen that the basic EPS was around 2.425 and our diluted EPS was around 2.05. So we had seen earlier that this gets diluted and it goes down. Now what happens if we kind of consider the convertible securities and the EPS actually moves up? Say for example EPS, after taking into consideration the convertible preferred shares, moves up to 2.45. So this will actually move up, right? And in this case, if this happens, the securities would be called as anti-dilutive. And if the securities are anti-dilutive, then you don't take these into consideration. So you ignore these anti-dilutive securities. So let's take an example here. I'll just modify our previous example where there were 500 convertible preferred shares of 5%, $100 par value, each convertible into 40 shares. So let me remove this. Instead of 40 shares, let me say that okay, they only convert into 1 share each. Okay, so now let us come to the diluted EPS or the calculation of EPS in this updated case. So what will be a diluted EPS, or let's say EPS? Here it would be net income. This is 250,000 minus 5,000, which was the preferred dividend from the first case, minus the preferred dividend from the convertibles, and then we add back 2500 divided by, we have the weighted average common shares, this is 100,000, plus now 500 convertible shares, preference shares, gets converted into 1 common share each. So here will be the addition of 500 common shares. So earlier this number was 20,000. So the numerator will be like this: 245,000 divided by the denominator. The denominator would be 100,000 plus 500. So this comes out to be 100,500. And this numerator divided by the denominator, this will actually come out to be $2.44. So what you will note in this updated case is that the moment we had changed this convertible equation, this no more remains dilutive. Actually it becomes anti-dilutive because the basic EPS has increased to 2.44 as against 2.425. So if this is the case, then we will ignore preferred convertible shares, and in this case our basic EPS will be actually equal to the diluted EPS. Now what we saw was that the preference shares can be dilutive as well as anti-dilutive. There can be a quick method in order to check whether the convertible security is dilutive or anti-dilutive. So let's see that quick method. Now in this quick method, we don't go by calculating the EPS of basic as well as dilutive to the fullest extent. What we limit ourselves is just this numerator and the denominator, which is basically the incremental impact of this preference shares. So what are the incremental impact of this convertible preference shares? The incremental impact in the numerator would be convertible preferred dividends. This is the incremental impact on the numerator, and the incremental impact in the denominator is the additional number of shares which are released due to preference conversions. So let's look at both the cases which we had learned earlier. There was case 1 where we had looked at 500 convertible preference shares and each of them got converted into 40 shares each. And then we had looked at a case where it got the anti-dilutive, and these 500 preference shares which were convertible, they got converted into 1 share. So let's look at what happens in individual cases. And the convertible preferred dividends was around $2,500, and we also had this information that the basic EPS was $2.425. So we are taking just the same example as we have learned earlier. Let's try to calculate this fraction in case 1. So this would be $2500. That is the numerator because this is the convertible preferred dividends. And the additional number of common shares that will be issued will be 500 into 40. So this will be 20,000. So here this would be 20,000. So obviously this is less than $1. And what will this mean is that if this is less than $1, your basic EPS is much greater than your this fraction. So this means it has a dilutive impact. So this needs to be considered as a dilutive securities. Now let's take the second case where we have 500 preference shares and each get converted into one share. So let's recalculate the numerator and the denominator in this case. This would be $2500 divided by how many shares? Here the number of shares will be 500 multiplied by 1, that is 500 shares. So when I divide this, this comes out to be $5.00. So if I compare this 5.00 as compared to 2.425, I find that this is greater than 2.425, and we imply that these securities would be anti-dilutive and should not be considered. In fact, they should be ignored while we calculate the diluted EPS. So here this was anti-dilutive. In the first case it was dilutive, and this could be found using this shortcut method that we have now looked at.